We millennials all remember the game that made our parents question if we were destined for a future starring in a true crime documentary series, and spoiler alert, we would not be the ones lighting up a room. Okay, there are a couple of those to be fair, but this time I just so happened to be talking about Rollercoaster Tycoon. So let's make that one a wee bit more realistic. To begin our Rollercoaster Tycoon diorama, I grabbed a wooden base that I thought would be a good size and made a rough plan of how I wanted to lay out the composition. I knew I wanted a roller coaster doing a loop-de-loop and then ending the way that all of my, and let's be honest, your childhood builds did, with the resulting disaster scene on the ground below. While I worked out how I was going to put this thing together in my head, I got a start on some of the wooden square dowels, and then promptly stopped that start to get annoyed by the shiny patch of varnish on my cutting mat. After wasting time sanding that down a bit, I hand drilled some holes into the ends of the dowels, knowing I'll need to pin them in for strength later. Then I grabbed some armature wire to really get a start on that track. And yes, got annoyed again at the varnish mark before giving up spinning the cutting mat around and resolving to get a new one before the next video. Now that I could actually finally concentrate, I decided to continue on with the hardest part of the project, and that would be the death coaster itself. Much harder to make dangerous in real life than in the game, by the way, as even if you weren't going on a guest murdering spree and wanted to make a proper working coaster, if you didn't get the absolute perfect degree of elevation on your build, the cars would go hurtling back down the track like a pensioner trying to traverse an icy hill to Tesco's while wearing moon shoes. In order to straighten out the wire, I used the old trick of shoving it right up the crevasse of my drill and holding the other end tightly while running it. This gets rid of any and all kinks more effectively than finding out your uncle uses the same search terms as you because he clicked the share to Facebook button intentionally. To shape the track into a loop-de-loop, I grabbed a nice circular tin of Ronseal varnish and carefully bent the wire around it. To this day, Ronseal has a chokehold on me, by the way. I don't know if you have it in other countries, it might just be a UK thing, but in the 90s, maybe early 2000s, their slogan was, "Does what it says on the tin." And I must say that multiple times a week to this day. I've definitely said it multiple times within a 5-minute period when using my customer service voice to explain basic concepts to boomers. Let me know in the comments what advertising slogan from your youth randomly still lives in your brain rent-free, because I definitely have a few others that I'd need Clockwork Orange to get rid of from my psyche. After a bit of fiddling about with the wires, I realised the loops were a bit too small, and at the scale we're going for, our riders would be at risk of being beheaded by the other side of the loop halfway around. I know I'm making a death coaster that's designed to fling them off at the end and straight into the afterlife, but after being mentally scarred as a child watching that one Final Destination movie, that's just a step too far for me. The second set came out much better, and I could then start chopping up some wooden skewers for the inner part of the track. These are slightly thinner than the armature wire I used for the main rails, so with this track style I'm using as the basis of my design, I think it worked really well. Now, sticking these on was what I could only describe as a colossal pain in the arse. It was so fiddly, and because I wanted them to be even, I had to go from one side all the way to the other, which meant the loops wanted to fall over constantly. It took bloody hours to do, and I inhaled so many CA glue fumes that I probably thought I was on Mars having an afternoon tea with a politically astute badger discussing foreign policy by this point. But I got it done. I cured the CA glue with a heavy sprinkle of baking soda to make a strong bond, which will double as some crusty rust later on. After many years had been taken from my life, I was left with this structure which, thankfully, felt pretty sturdy, and ends with a complete drop-off to send our guests on a lovely little flight through the air. You don't get that on the teacups. I grabbed those wooden dowels again and started cutting them into lengths with my miter shears to act as the legs of the coaster. I was still a bit worried about it all falling apart, so I did make sure to pin all the pieces together with some pieces of paperclip wire, which is the perfect level of strength but slight bendability for when you've misaligned things a bit. As you can see at this point, I got tired of the hand drill and just used the electric one, making many holes in the cutting mat, which has truly sealed its fate for the trash. I gave the seams a wee sand and started pinning those into the base. I used the track to figure out exactly how I wanted the legs to sit and got them all in place and secure. I ended up snapping my drill bit in the middle of this, so I guess that's my karma for being lazy. When that was all done though, I could stick down the track. I used a bit of 5-minute epoxy for even more strength and globbed on quite a bit to seal in the track to the legs and hopefully look like welded metal once it's painted. Speaking of, that's the track construction finished and ready to prime. While that was drying, it was time to start on some scenery. I began by conditioning some Super Sculpey, which if you've seen some of my previous videos, you will know I am desperately trying to use up. It got ruined through dampness and dryness and oldness and probably sadness, honestly, so it's just not nice to use. But your gal is not in a position to be throwing money away right now, so use it we must. I knew I wanted to make some of the iconic food stalls that we see in the game. I remember them all so vividly from playing it as a child, and I always thought they looked cool AF. I guess I was an easily impressed 8-year-old. It was hard to choose which stalls to make, but for the first one I settled on the burger stall. I think it might be the most recognisable one if I had to guess, plus making a big burger sounded kind of fun, so that was that. After making the top bun shape, I textured the edges of some strips of clay and folded them up uneven concertina style to make some ruffles of lettuce. Which I do begrudge doing, by the way, as I firmly believe that putting lettuce on hot food makes you an absolute wrong'un and you need your hard drives checked. Although, to be fair, I don't even like burgers and have eaten maybe maximum 5 of them in my whole life, so, you know, not my circus. Next, we need to do the topping that should be on, well, almost everything ever, which is of course the cheese. I started off with one heavily processed slice, which I smoothed out the edges on and stuck underneath the lettuce. As a burger noob, I'm not 100% sure what the ideal order of topping operations would be, but this is how it looks in the game, as far as I can tell for the 11 whole pixels it takes up. After popping on some seeds to the bun, I gave it a coat of clay softener to smooth and remove fingerprints before putting it in the oven whilst I work on the bottom. I made a ring of clay, as we obviously need somewhere for the staff to stand, but there doesn't seem to be a door or gate or anything on this thing, so I guess they just have to parkour over the meat to start their shift. I did end up coming back and making this a bit taller later, but once that was done, I took another ring and textured it to look like the beef burger itself. This is a piece of epoxy clay that I made into a texturing tool many moons ago, and it worked really well for a mincy type of texture. Once that was stuck on, I made a serving counter by using the side of my sculpting tool to imprint that metal texture you see on these kinds of things, before popping in a back counter and a cooktop. After that was baked and the aforementioned extra height added, I could attach the top. The top bun is up at an angle in the game, so I needed some decent support to get it to stay in position. So I glued in some of the armature wire to stand it up. I drilled some holes in the bottom bun, added a fresh slice of cheese to cover up the mess underneath, and covered the wire in liquid Sculpey, letting it puddle up to look like ketchup dripping down before baking it all again. For the other stall we're making, it could only be one choice. We're doing a darker version of RCT here, so it had to be the candy floss stall. Candy floss, aka cotton candy or fairy floss or whatever you call it where you are, which I wouldn't need to clarify if this thing looked anything like candy floss, and not, you know, the demonic spawn of Beelzebub come to rain damnation upon the earth. So after getting down the shape of this fiend with some foil and a layer of clay, I cut out the big mouth opening and mapped out the eyes. I used some circles of clay to add those on in a manner that truly encapsulates the candy floss stall's intentions to stare long into the abyss of your soul and bring about eternal perdition. With that done, I could texture the whole piece, which I did by using a ball stylus to sculpt in lots of tiny, spirally, wavy grooves all over, making sure to cover everything except the eyes. Then I just had to add on another metal counter to serve from and pop him into the fiery hells of the air fryer. I should have supported the counter as it did flop down a bit during the bake, but hey, don't worry pal, flaccidity happens to the best of us, you'll be right. With pliers, I pulled out the tin foil that was keeping the shape, so we have a nice, but even less accessible inside for the staff. I am starting to feel a bit bad for how much I roasted this thing now that I appear to be performing some sort of gynecological procedure on it, so I'll be a bit gentler with my words. Like how the gynecologist asks you if you've got a holiday booked this year whilst you're staring up at the ceiling in the most awkward position of your life. After that, I cleaned up the edges a bit and made some tiny sticks of candy floss to add onto the stall later before getting started on our guest of honour. So I know usually a bit later on in my videos I do my silly wee catchphrase and say scale is only a suggestion. This time though, I really mean it. It is a vague recommendation at best. Kind of like when your mum suggests that you take the chicken out of the freezer while she's at work. That is to say, it's a suggestion we won't be heeding very much at all in this one, in order to get the composition the way that I want it and not have the character and the stalls just dwarfed by a massive roller coaster that won't even fit on my shelves. We're gonna have to tweak that just a wee tad. So with that in mind, I made these armatures, which realistically are a bit big for the roller coaster size, but if you came to the comedy Rollercoaster Tycoon Death Coaster video for perfect realism, I think you might need to exit through the gift shop. The reason there's 3 armatures here, by the way, is because I was gonna do some of the victims of the roller coaster. Quickly realised that wouldn't be like the best vibes, so chucked them in a drawer. Instead, I started by covering the one armature in clay and smoothing it into a recognisable form, adding little snakes and blending them to build the shape of the clothes. For those of you that had the pleasure of playing RCT back in the day, not only will you know it's the sole reason us millennials can put management experience on our CVs, but you'll also remember that the park guests are the bane of your existence. Moany little bastards is what they are. And while, yes, of course, we all enjoyed dropping them into a nearby lake when they got a bit too mouthy, they are unfortunately necessary to beat the game. Other than whinging about there being too much litter or the fact that it's crowded in a theme park in the middle of arsing July, our most annoying complaint has to be, I feel sick. Mostly because after exiting a ride with the G-force equivalent of a geriatric snail in a traffic jam, they proceed to bulk up their cursed candy floss lunch all over the bloody park. So without a doubt, I knew I had to make our guest one of those ones. Not forgetting to give him the BBL treatment, I sculpted him some shoes and added some small details. Onto the face, there's really only one model of guest in the original game, just an average-looking, whining, entitled white man for everyone. Honestly, it must be like turning up to an incel meetup wandering around one of these parks on a busy day. Because they are so simple, I tried to emulate that and chose to go for the sort of halfway to Vomitville expression from the game art. After giving him some simple hands, he got some clay softener and a bake to save our progress before adding hair. Now, to be frank with you all, I did do the hair from memory, and for some reason, I forgot that they have a slightly spiky hairstyle because you can't really see that when they're walking around the park. Their hair looks more flat, so that's the way I did it because that's the way that I think of them, rather than the art from the UI. But with that added, he could pop off for a final bake and we can see to the cars. Now, obviously the crashed cars are not likely to be in the best condition, so instead of wasting time making a car to smash it up, I'm just going to make some car-esque shrapnel to sprinkle about. I grabbed some sprues from my sprue box. This is a miscellaneous model airplane that I got for cheap years ago, and used my clippers to snap and chop the bits up in a fairly rough manner so they look like they've been suitably exploded apart. Along with that, I did also chop up some other bits from my bits boxes, like these printer ink pieces, which are always really handy for scratch bashing, so I tend to keep a few on hand. Once they were all mangled up, I had a nice pile of pieces which I spray painted black on one side and then red on the other to be the inside and outside colours of the car. And that's the same red in fact as I used on the track itself. I painted the legs black before dry brushing with grey and silver to show the old damaged metal peeking through the coating. I then got onto weathering the track itself. I'm making it pretty messed up and run down because we are doing a realistic version after all, and I don't know about you, but when I was a child, I wasn't hiring handymen for the park because I needed those funds to create what can only be described as the biggest furry convention ever seen. Just so many tech bros. After sponging on the black and silver chips to show the layers underneath the red, I slapped on a generous helping of my personal saviour Dirty Down Rust. I went pretty heavily, especially on the parts that we built up with the baking soda during construction. With that done, we can start painting the hellspawn that is the candy floss stall. I had primed it white originally and then realised black would be better, so started covering it in black craft paint, but quickly realised that painting an opaque coat with craft paint without ruining it with brush lines was probably the kind of torture this thing has come to Earth to inflict, so I popped back outside to respray it instead. The stall has a bit of a mottled kind of texture in my mind, which I think is just a symptom of the pixelated art style and low resolution, but to capture that I went in with a cream dry brush all over, fairly heavily to get the colour on there, but leaving some dark spots and showing off the texture. Unfortunately, it seems Candy Flazuzu here seems to be back in the stirrups at the doctor's office for this part. I'd have that face too if pap smears were like this. Then I went in with some layers of increasingly darker pinks with more of a stippling motion. The counter got a few coats of silver, and the eyes I tried to match to the game as best I could with the muted blue and black for the pupils. The candy floss sticks got the same treatment, and then everything was doused in a nice dark wash to finish. Just popping in to say, if you're enjoying this video so far, please consider liking the video, subscribing to my channel, leaving a comment. I'll leave my Patreon down below as well. It all helps support me and encourage me to keep making these YouTube videos. It's hard out here on YouTube, so anything really makes a difference. Onto the burger stall, I based everything in nice saturated colours. It's definitely a more solid, less hellish looking object, so the white prime was perfect base for this. I went in with beige for the buns, green for the lettuce, brown for the burger, nice yellow plastic processed cheese, and some silver for the counters, finishing off with some nice red Tommy sauce. To give the bun a nice toasted look, I stippled on some increasingly darker shades, keeping it more to the centre each time. I dry brushed everywhere with texture before going in with some lighter versions of each colour to brush on some highlights. I like how this is coming together, and I'm glad I decided to make the stalls. I did originally plan to make something akin to the Mr. Bones Wild Ride, which, if you're not deep in the lore of Rollercoaster Tycoon, someone years ago made a creepy roller coaster that was so long and painfully slow it took like 4 years to ride, and it became a bit of a meme over time. So the diorama would have just been lots of track and then some more track. But I think having the stalls is a bit more fun and interesting to look at. The burger got the same dark wash to dirty it up and tie things together. Then I left that to dry while quickly painting up some little condiment bottles I'd made with the leftover clay. It's time to get back to Moni McGee over here and get him painted up too. I went with a denim jeans colour for the legs and a nice blue t-shirt, brown hair and simple black shoes. I gave him a base skin tone so we have something to build the green up on, and let that dry down while I started on some details. I went for a more sketchy highlighting style that I've been using recently, again with the lighter versions of each colour, making sure to emphasise the creases being made by his bent over, chucking his guts up posture. I did the same with the jeans and then the hair, building up a few colours to add a touch of dimension, not going too far though to keep the simple art style intact. I then started to build up some of the sickly green on his face. I tried to blend it in a bit so it wasn't fully green, but has some hints of the skin tone in there too. I mean, he looks more like a wet lettuce than the actual lettuce, but I think that means we're on the right track. I popped on his pupils, pointing in opposite directions, which, with a painting hand that's shakier than Brenda from finance, who's had 8 coffees before noon because she was up all night on the piss, that's how a lot of the pupils I do end up without me even trying. Now time to give the base some attention. I mixed up a paste of Mod Podge, filler, sand and paint, with a squish of water to act as our gravelly path. I made sure it wasn't too heavy in texture and used a fine sand since we will need to paint over this later and I want it to be somewhat smooth. After slopping it on with a brush, I use a palette knife to smooth it over and add that layered concrete texture. In the game, the paths are all very square, so I left out this corner to be a patch of grass. This will help break up the piece a bit and add a pop of colour back there, so I added some brown paint as a quick base for that. When that was all dry, I went over everything with a black wash to darken out the paths, before dry brushing in lighter greys and browns. Before we go any further with the base, I want to get everything stuck down so I can get a better idea of placement. So I hot glued the Candy Flosmodius up the back there, adding the Rogue Forgotten floss sticks around it. Then up to the front, I glued down the burger stall and condiments at a jaunty angle that, while not game accurate, is accurate to the angle that I want it to sit at, which is much more important. Now we know that the cars are crashing off the end of this thing. So realistically, this would be a major crime scene, especially because health and safety clearly hasn't bothered to shut it down and it's obviously been going on for years. So with our guest for reference, I started painting on some police chalk body outlines all over the ground. This is just a base layer, so I wasn't too bothered about how they looked, but something about having to Betty Spaghetti around the camera and looking half through the viewfinder. I did accidentally make some of them a bit small looking, so I mean, it is a theme park. I guess there's probably some kids kicking about the place. I made sure to vary the shapes and even had one little headless dude down here and a little circle up the top for his presumably discovered cranium. Candy Flucifer probably thought that one was a sacrifice, to be honest. While those dried, I glued our man down, clinging for dear life to the burger stall while his life flashes before his eyes and his dinner flashes before his esophagus. I went over the chalk lines with a good dry brush of grey, where the chalk would be knocked off from the high points from all the foot traffic and time. And then I give everything a couple layers of dark wash to really weather those in and make them look old. Once that was dry, we can add a few fresh ones over top, including my favourite little guy up here whose legs are up over the base of the coaster. Next, I grabbed some ballast and dried leaves and used those to sprinkle around the path as bits of gravel. This place is not well swept, so we want it to be a bit messy, especially in the middle of all this chaos. I used Mod Podge to stick them down before adding some of our shrapnel all about the place, which I sealed in with a good scoosh of IPA and water before dripping on a watered down Mod Podge on top. I did this around all the chalk lines and left it to dry. Now onto the grass patch. I'm using this Army Painter static grass. It doesn't have a size on it that I can see, but it's a pretty short one. I think because of the heat wave at the moment, the static grass glue seemed a lot more liquidy than usual, so I just did my best to spread it all out as evenly as I could. Then with the static grass applicator, I added a good thick layer of grass all over the glue. It's always harder when there's things in the way, but if you persist with it, you'll get it working most of the time, and end up with a lovely lush lawn and be able to tip the access back into the tub. So we're nearly at the end now, and we only have one last detail to go, so trigger warning, for it is spew time. The trigger warning is mostly for me, to be honest, because as an OCD sufferer, I cannot stand anything remotely to do with vomiting. I actually wasn't even going to add this in until everyone I told about the project was like, yeah Lex, you better make a big pile of bulk or your diorama will be nothing without it. Or, you know, words to that effect. So with this mixture of UV resin and alcohol ink and chalk and chunks, I relent and add it to the base. I did it in a few layers to make sure it cured well since it's slightly opaque, added a few splashes roundabout, and thankfully with that we are done and it's time for the beauty shots. Well, thank you so much for watching. As always, I really appreciate you hanging out with me for this time. If you liked the video, please like and comment and subscribe and check the Patreon and all that stuff that I probably already said at some point in this video. And I will catch you after.